In this presentation, we're going to talk about transport and the formation of tissues. So cells, in order to survive or to grow, they depend on a constant exchange of molecules with their environment, and they need to be able to transfer those molecules through their specialized membrane, and they have proteins on that membrane called transport proteins, and they also have little channels. So this allows things to get inside of the cells. They can do that through active, which requires energy, or passive means, which does not. Active transport, this is going to require energy to move more large molecules and molecular complexes into the cell. So we need energy to move things like sodium and potassium inside and outside of the cells. And that's really important because that sodium and potassium gradient drives the electron changes, the energy changes that are needed for our cells to be able to function. We need to have the right amount of potassium inside of the cell and the right amount of sodium outside of the cell. And when those balances get out of whack, people get diseases. Now, most of the ATP that is made by cells is used to maintain that transport of sodium and potassium. That's how important sodium and potassium are. Most of our energy is used to make sure we have that balance just right. So in an example of where that active transport fails is hypokalemia. So this is a situation that's caused by a malfunctioning sodium-potassium pump. That sodium-potassium pump is crucial for maintaining that proper balance of sodium and potassium ions across that cell membrane. It actively transports sodium ions out of the cell and potassium into the cell, and it has to use ATP to do that. So when that pump fails, there's several problems that can occur. We can have an electrolyte imbalance where sodium accumulates inside of the cell and potassium moves out. That's not good. We can end up with cellular dysfunction. This is where there's an imbalance that affects the cell's ability to maintain that resting membrane potential, which we absolutely have to have for nerve impulses and for muscles to be able to contract. So some of the symptoms that we see in hypokalemia, which is low potassium levels in the blood, whenever you see emia, that's what it means, in the blood. It means that we're going to have not enough potassium in the blood, right? Excuse me. And it can actually end up causing muscle weakness. And again, that's why, because it's negatively impacting the nerve impulse to the muscles. That can cause cramps, fatigue. It can even be bad enough that it impacts the heart muscle so that the person ends up with cardiac arrhythmias because it can't function well without the correct ion balance. So what causes that failure of active transport? Several different things. Chronic kidney disease can do it. This is why our kidney is so important. There's medications like diuretics that can cause hypokalemia because they make you basically pee out all of your potassium. And there's disorders that impair that function of the sodium-potassium pump. So this is a picture of the sodium-potassium pump right here that is using energy to push the right balance of sodium outside of the cell and the right balance of potassium inside of the cell. So again, having that sodium-potassium pump is vital. We need the ATP, we need the perfect extracellular fluid. All of these things have to be in place in order for our body to function. Endocytosis. We're going to actually talk about all of these different ways the cells move things in and out of them here. So endocytosis involves vesicles that form in the cell to allow substances to be transported from outside of the cell to the inside. And this process involves the cell actually kind of creating a little pocket and engulfing the substance and with part of the plasma membrane and then just kind of pulling it inside of the cell. And there's two different types of endocytosis. Pinocytosis is a type of endocytosis, and its job is to move fluid and different solute molecules inside of the cell. And phagocytosis, it will engulf large particles like bacteria, and they get pulled inside of the cell where they're ingested through these large vesicles called vacuoles. And there's actually diseases and conditions where those vacuoles fail, believe it or not. So phagocytosis, we see it a lot in the immune system. And it's crucial to our body's ability to respond to bacteria and other microorganisms and get rid of them. So how it works is through basically 6 different steps here. So recognition and attachment. This is where the phagocyte, or the specific immune cell, recognizes and binds to the bacteria through surface receptors. And we're going to talk about that in our immunity module in detail. Engulfment is where the phagocyte's membranes grabs a hold of that bacteria, creates a little pouch around it, and pulls it inside of the cell. The specific name for that membrane-bound vacuole is a phagosome, okay? So the phagosome formation, that is going to, the phagosome with the bacteria inside of it moves into the inside of the cell, the immune cell, and then the phagosome matures. So the phagosome fuses with the lysosomes that have digestive enzymes and antimicrobial substances, and that allows the next step to happen, which is where the phagolysome, which is the phagosome with the enzymes infused in it, gets that bacteria exposed to the enzyme, which is where the bacteria breaks down. It's actually kind of creepy when you think about it in detail. And then exocytosis is basically the cell barfing out the remains. I don't have a nicer way to say that. Polarized cells, there are 2 different types of solutes in our body fluids, which are either electrolytes or non-electrolytes. Electrolytes are going to have an electrical charge, and they break down or dissociate into constituent ions, which are smaller parts, and whenever they're placed in solution, but non-electrolyte cells do not. So all of our body cells are electrically polarized, with the inside of the cell being more negatively charged than the outside. Put a big star by that, because that is really important concept for you to remember. And the voltage difference across that plasma membrane is referred to as the resting membrane potential. This should be coming back to you. You should be going, oh yeah, I remember that from physiology, hopefully. If you don't, if I'm saying stuff and you're like, I've never heard of this before, pull out your book and find the content in the chapter, because you need to refresh your memory on it. So now, because of that resting membrane potential, when we have an excitable cell, like a nerve cell or a muscle cell, it gets that electrical chemical stimulus, and cations enter into the cell, and then inside of the cell they cause this rapid change in the resting membrane potential, and that's what is known as our action potential. That action potential moves along the cell's plasma membrane, and then when it comes in contact with the next cell, it makes the change in the next cell as well. And that's how we have that electrochemical signal that gets moved from cell to cell to cell. Tissue formation happens when the cells of one or more types organize themselves together. And these organs are going to be made up of different types of tissue, and they function as either tracts or systems. So the cells organize in tissue, and the maintenance of that whole process occurs through recognition and cell communication, which we've talked about, selective cell-to-cell adhesion, which we talked about in the last presentation, and memory. And memory we're going to talk about quite a bit when we get to the immune unit. So how tissues form is initially from stem cells, and there's different types of stem cells, and yes, I want you to know what they all are. So to become a tissue, the cells have to be fully specialized. They need to become the type of cell that tissue needs, and they do this through the process of differentiation. Differentiation means maturation of an immature cell into a more mature and specific type. We are going to talk about that a lot throughout all of the different discussions that we talk about this semester. So it's important to understand what that means. And it's really going to be important when we get to cancer. So all cells are going to start out from stem cells of one type or another, and then they become the type of cell the body needs for a specific type of tissue or response to a problem. Stem cells, so embryonic versus somatic. Embryonic stem cells are probably what you think about when you're thinking about stem cells. Basically, these are ones that come from an inner cell mass of a blastocyst, so a fetus that's being formed, right? The cells that make up a fetus as it forms. So these types of cells are pluripotent, which means they can differentiate or change into just about any cell type of the body. The only thing they can't form into is placenta. Somatic cells, these stem cells, these are adult stem cells, and we find them throughout the body. They are what's referred to as multipotent. They are limited in their ability to differentiate, but they still can become a variety of different types of cells. So for example, hematopoietic stem cells are found in our bone marrow. They're just kind of hanging out until the body tells them what kind of blood cell we need. So if we need more white, if we need more red, they can become the type of cell they need to be. Mesenchymal stem cells, these are also found in the bone marrow and in the fat tissue, and they can differentiate or grow to become bone or cartilage or muscle cells, again, depending on what we need. So if we're out bodybuilding and we need to build more muscles, our body is going to rely on these mesenchymal stem cells to make more muscle cells. Neural stem cells are located in the brain and in the spinal cord, and they give rise to neurons, astrocytes, and oligodendrocytes. So they're pretty important as well. So we're also going to talk about perinatal and cancer stem cells. So perinatal stem cells come from perinatal tissues, and they're found in the cord blood, amniotic fluid, and the placenta. They are multipotent, but they have a broader differentiation potential than our typical adult stem cells do. So they are considered kind of an ethical source because they can be collected after a child is born, a baby is born, without harming anything, and they can be used for regenerative medicine because, again, they can differentiate into a variety of different cells. The cancer stem cells, these are also stem-like cells, but they're found in tumors. They have the ability to do what a lot of stem cells do. So they can self-renew, they can differentiate and become a new or different type of cell, and they're going to allow the tumor cell to grow and to keep getting bigger and bigger. And targeting these particular cancer stem cells is a current area of cancer research because we're trying to figure out how to kill them off, and they're often quite resistant to traditional therapies. And over here on the picture, you can kind of see the different ways cancer cells could grow. Summary of stem cell potency. This is kind of what I want you to put a star by this particular slide because I absolutely want you to know these definitions. Totipotent, again, it can become any type of cell, including embryonic cells. This usually is found in the zygote during the very few first cell divisions that are happening. Pluripotent, they can become nearly all types of cells except for placenta. We do see these as embryonic stem cells as well. Multipotent, they can differentiate into a limited but still a fair big number of cells. Again, adult stem cells, this could be things like red blood cells, that kind of thing. Unipotent, these are only produced by one type of cell type, but they still have the ability for self-renewal. We see these in skin. And again, there are 4 different main types of tissue that I want you to know about. Neural tissue is made up of neurons that receive and transmit electrical impulses rapidly across those junctions, and their specific junctions are called synapses. Epithelial tissues cover most of our internal and external surfaces. They provide us protection. They are able to absorb, secrete, and excrete. Connective tissue, which is going to be a big one for us to focus on, especially when it comes to inflammation and that type of thing. Connective tissue binds our tissues together and so that they form organs. It also supports the organs in their location, so they're not just like moving around inside of our body. And they also, connective tissue also serves as a storage site for excess nutrients. Muscle tissue is composed of long, thin, highly contractile cells called fibers. Muscle tissue that is attached to bones allows us to actually move. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to move. Muscle tissue in internal organs allows for involuntary movement. Like, for example, in our heart, we have muscle tissue called cardiomyocytes, and those little muscle cells allow the heart to beat and contract and do all the things that we rely on to live.